t-shirt. So if anybody hasn't heard about this, we're competing in the state election in this region, which is the Northern Metropolitan, we're aiming to get Stephen Jolly into Parliament in the upper house. Anyone is interested in helping out, we need as many volunteers as we can get. Unified left ticket, and it's the first time it's happened in decades, and we're all extremely excited to be part of it. The election is November the 24th. So that's about it, and I'll hand you over to Guy.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, so a few alterations to the program. Not only is the other speaker not here, who I was hoping would be the one who knew about the economic stuff and whether Trump's impact on the working class with actual stats, but I didn't actually get to the States this time. I got ill just before I was going to head out to the midterms, and so watched it from my bed of pain here. So I don't have on-the-ground reporting from this time around. What I'd like to do, I think, is there's an enormous sort of floating sort of commentary about Trumpism and what's happening and that sort of thing. I think it's most useful if what I do is start from a bit about the midterms and then talk about my experience of the Trump election in 2016, going around the US at that point, and what struck me about that in terms of the gap between the reality on the ground and the official liberal commentary of it in the mainstream press, and then start to talk a bit about Trump in office, what Trump and Trumpism is, get to the midterms, and then talk a bit more about the different politics of class, identity, and that sort of thing in relation to the left. Trumpism going into the 2020 election in the next period, and that should take us through, and hopefully in the question period we can have as many comments and cross debate as questions if people feel the urge. Okay, so it's looking more and more in the wake of the midterm elections like there has been a so-called blue wave of Democrat renewal in relation to Trump. Democrats have taken at least 40 seats in Congress, which they didn't expect realistically before Trump came along to do until about 2022, 2024. They really resigned themselves for a decade out of power in Congress. So they've taken control again of the House of Representatives, and it even looks as though facing a hard Senate contest in which a lot of their seats were up for re-election and very few of the Republicans were. They've limited the Republicans to really possibly only 2 or even 1 Senate gains. That still leaves the Republicans in narrow control of the Senate, but that's nothing like what was feared. It looked like it'd be 4 or 5 senators. In addition to that, they've taken about 7 or 8 state houses, state which they had really sort of lost control of for a decade out of general corruption, decline of the Democratic machine, lassitude, elitism, that sort of thing. And there's also been a couple of crucial ballot measure victories, the most important of which was Amendment Ballot Measure 4 in Florida, which re-enfranchises felons, gives them the vote again. And a felon in Florida is any black man or woman who's ever smoked a joint in their car and got caught. So that re-enfranchises 1.4 million people, and that suddenly makes Florida, one would say, from being a borderline state to a Democrat state. In addition to that, within, obviously, the Democrat victory, there were victories within the Democrat Party against the centrists, and against time servers, and even against a lassitudinous sort of old centre-left that had just claimed safe seats for decades, and that's most visibly people like Ocasio-Cortez in New York and in Brooklyn and Queens. But across the country there's been a dozen, 15, 20 people who have won primaries, who are young people of colour, women, working class people, explicit socialists, and that sort of thing. So there was, so those struggles were equally important, and not only that, but they weren't just in safe seats, which are, you know, often uncontested because of gerrymandering, like those politics in America to create these ultra-safe seats. They were also in marginal seats too, where we've been told again and again that left candidates could never win, and the only candidates that could win were centrists. So that is a pretty extraordinary moment, and it's worth realising that that happened because the midterms for decades have been the rock on which left-wing or even centre-left or mildly progressive politics crashes, for the simple reason that the only people who tend to come out and vote are older white people who watch Fox and have not much more to do than come out and vote. And it's always been very difficult, if not impossible, to even make people aware that the midterms exist. You know, many Americans just think you would vote once every 4 years. Turnout in the 14 midterms was 38% of the electorate. So you can see what a tremendous turnaround that was. So something happened, and I'll lead up to what there was. But let me just start then with the something that happened before, which was the rise of Donald Trump and his election. I almost, you know, drew the jackpot in writing an article saying that Trump was going to win it 7 days before the election actually happened. The holy grail of the electoral pundit actually picking something like that. And eventually Hillary's polling convinced me that she would actually win it, but she didn't. But there was a moment about 3 weeks before the election when I thought, oh, Trump is going to win this. And that was when I was in Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, this crucial state which should be solid Democrat, but which had become a swing state. And I had gone to one of these bullshit things that had sprung up on the alt-right or the hard right. These very sort of amorphous, non-party sort of things. When Hillary had called Trump supporters a bunch of deplorables, all these people had started groups called the deplorables. Now you couldn't tell whether this was, you know, funded from some bunker in Washington and put out as what we call astroturf, which is pseudo-grassroots politics, or whether it was really spontaneous. But this was a bunch of bikers from Arizona or something, and they had started this tour of America, the deplorables tour, and they would just go and pitch up to a city and that sort of thing, and not much more than that, people would gather and that sort of stuff, called themselves the deplorable. And so I went to see them in this nowhere part of North Philadelphia, a white working middle class suburb, that sort of thing. And of course they sent out all the times, the times wrong, they never turned up. So this sort of stuff happened all the time with Trump's sort of crazy supporters. They were all very mentally disorganised a lot of the time. So I went into this bar next to where they had said they would have their event, and it was one of those horseshoe bars, you know, like Cheers in America. Everybody sits around this bar, you come in after work, and there's a social obligation to talk to the person next to you. You can't just sit in the bar and moan like a British pub or anything like that. You've actually got this ethical obligation to at least exchange a few words with the person next to you. So, you know, this bar was like a Billy Joel song, you know, there's a few barflies, there's a couple of people in shirt sleeves just after work, there's a couple of tradies, that sort of thing, sports on the TV, that sort of stuff. And so I'm talking to all these people, and it becomes a little forum of about 10 or 12 people, and they're 8 of them white, 2 black, and the black guys were unequivocal, were equivocal, as I say. Every white person there was going to vote for Trump. Everyone. And most of them said, I can't stand the man, I think he's a pig, I think he's disgusting, but something's got to happen. Something's got to change. There's got to be some interruption in the system. Now you could say, on the one hand, well, the bar is a particularly self-selecting place, so these people have nowhere else to go. But it really wasn't like that. Those people were just dropping in for 2 or 3 beers. There are a couple of people in for the night, but by and large, this was a pretty good sample of what was going to happen. And this is what did happen. the Democrats lost Pennsylvania. Now, they were always going to lose rural Pennsylvania, which is really the start of the South. Pennsylvania is where Appalachia starts. So you have Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, big Democratic strongholds, and the rest of it is the Bible Belt, the northern end. But to lose Pennsylvania, you had to lose somewhere like North Philly or not do well enough. And that's exactly what happened. And that, to me, was the sort of culmination of seeing a campaign that eventuated in the one important truth that is often forgotten about the 2016 election. And that is that there's a false positive in the idea that Trump won. Trump actually didn't win, Hillary lost. In all of the states the Democrats have relied on for decades, the so-called blue wall of industrial states, going down from Wisconsin and Michigan, down through Ohio, that sort of thing. Hillary lost them all. She won, the Democrats won 3 million excess votes across the country, and they lost those 5 or 6 states they should have been able to rely on. And once Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan were gone, well, that was the ball game because Florida went as well. So when you looked at the figures, you could see that actually in most of those states and in most of those districts and counties, Romney had outpolled Trump. Romney had done better than Trump. What had happened was Hillary just did worse. She was absolutely, she absolutely repelled a certain vote. And that was partly an African American vote who weren't turning out because they turned out for Obama, but that's a pretty small percentage. What the people who weren't turning out for were the industrial working class, who had hitherto been relied on to just trick the polls. And that wasn't just them autonomously turning away from the Democrats. That was because the Hillary machine had differed from the Obama machine in that it had actively tried to fuck these people off. In the Hillary campaign, there was a very deliberate attempt to try and build a new Democrat coalition of people of color, African Americans, Latinos, Asian Americans, other groups, identity movement groups, social movement groups, LGBT people, that sort of thing, to create a gap between female and male voting in Hillary's favour with women in college and non-college women. And then to get, the amorphous suburbs, everything in America is a get out the vote thing. People stay home, people come out. People stay home, people come out. So you're trying to get people out more than you're trying to convince people to swing their vote. I went on a sort of get out the vote thing in 2012 with the Obama, sort of the Obama machine running it. And this was a very drilled operation. We were turned up in Columbus, Ohio at 6 a.m. We put into carloads. We were given a large pile of maps, and this was not door-to-door stuff. You would go to one neighbourhood and you'd go to 3 houses, and that was it. You'd try, if they were there, they were there. If they weren't, whatever. You didn't just try randomly this house or that house or go to these streets. You got in the car and you went to another neighbourhood. You did 4 houses. Spent half your time in the car, and this was based on layers and layers and layers of get out the vote sort of visits, back visits, that sort of thing. It was all sorts of social movement groups working together, disciplined, focused, that sort of thing. Everybody knew what they were doing. Now it's good luck and bad luck. It might be a bit random, but I went on a Hillary one in Pennsylvania and Maryland on the last days of the campaign, and that was a disaster. We were sent to a sort of housing estate, a mid-level sort of economic housing estate where you couldn't get into the flats unless you had a key, so you couldn't actually do anything, that sort of thing. There was a very sort of lassitudinous sort of attitude to it all. And that was indicative of the whole Hillary campaign. She never campaigned in Wisconsin. There was very little campaigning in Michigan. And there was an active idea of the unions were actively told not to campaign in some of these states. They were told that if they campaigned in these states, they would be punished when Hillary was president. But the idea was to suppress the vote, suppress Trump's vote, suppress our vote, but suppress Trump's vote more by not campaigning. Bernie Sanders, who had stumped up to, do whatever Hillary needed. Brooklyn Jewish civil rights lawyer turned Vermont hippie was sent to Arizona, to campaign among socially conservative Latin Democrats. It's almost sort of comical. And it was deliberate. It was a deliberate attempt to isolate Bernie Sanders. And there is no doubt about this. This was an attempt, this was the hubris of the Clinton campaign. They had this in the bag, so they were not only going to use this election to win, they were going to use it to reshape the Democratic Party so they wouldn't be beholden to Labour. And that would give them a freer hand with economic policy, in particular the TPP, which Hillary was obviously in favour of, an author and architect of, and had only just been shamed into opposing it as the Sanders campaign rolled forward. So the rest was history. Trump won by a couple of 100,000 votes, and he'd won, I would say, in terms of the positive things he did to win, and this is the other big, falsehood of the campaign, what he was doing, for me, I think, was not primarily about race. Not at all. He would, for his, his rallies and that sort of thing, for his 5 to 8% of the population that were his real core supporters, he would bang the drum on xenophobia and that sort of thing about migrants and this sort of stuff, and the violence of beating protesters up and that sort of thing. But this is not a, he's not a David Duke, he's not a Southern politician, he's not a George Wallace take two. He wasn't drawing on, the really old right-wing politics of black-white xenophobia and hatred. When he talked about black people and that sort of thing, it was sort of fuzzy and sort of, it was archaic, as Bernie Sanders talking about the ghetto. In a way, it was about, it was this sort of self-help, raising people up and that sort of thing. It was never a big target, and the people who this sort of stuff appealed to always vote Republican anyway. It's the South, it's mainly the South, and it's a few, sort of hardcore racists in the North. But Trump already had those, as they were going to vote, if they'd stood a cactus plant as the Republican candidate, they would vote Republican. The people Trump were winning were people who were really being drawn into politics from the absolute outer space of American suburban, ex-urban life. These were people who weren't even connected to the Tea Party or anything like that. These are people who had never thought of voting before. These were people who had never been energized by politics before. These were people who, lived in towns where there was no downtown. It's all been destroyed, so you never ran into other people. No bars, no taverns, These were people who, connected through cable TV and Facebook and that sort of thing, and lived in exurbs and went to Walmart and that sort of thing. And their politics, in many ways, don't graph easily onto a left-right spectrum. They're very economically collectivist in many ways and nationalist, and they were, Trump's economic nationalism appealed to them greatly. They were absolutely not connected to the Tea Party sort of American originalist fetishism, the sort of Declaration of Independence and small government, that sort of thing. Trump spoke to them. They identified with Trump as the sort of, tell it like it is sort of idea. The rudeness, they identified with his aggressiveness, they identified with his relentless one-upmanship, that he saw every televised debate as like a schoolyard thing, a chance, land a nickname on someone, low energy Jeb Bush, that sort of thing. And what can Jeb Bush do? He's gone from that moment. There's nothing else you can do. And the American journalist Tom Brokaw said something I thought was the most illuminating thing about this, and he said that for decades America had had two cultures, which one was a residual old elite culture of politics and slightly sort of politeness and manners and and this rising mass public culture that has been coming for the last 30 or 40 years, and which has its own ethic and its own way of conduct, and that's something like the Jerry Springer Show. You know, the idea that the Jerry Springer Show is an arena where claims of ethics, claims of moral right, claims of one-upmanship, humour, ridicule, aggressiveness, all mixed together in a way that the official public culture doesn't recognise. And Tom Brokaw said, Trump is the moment where that culture overtook the other culture. And from that he won. And that explained the repeated inability for people to understand that everything Trump did was never going to, you know, people kept saying, oh, he must be finished now, he must be finished now, he did this, grabbed their pussies, he did this, he did, you know, John McCain, I prefer heroes who don't get caught, you know, that sort of thing. Nothing did it, because really what had been going on for decades was that people had been having a lot of this stuff shoved down their throat, and they thought they identified it with it, but they really didn't. At the point when Trump said, I like heroes who don't get taken prisoner, a lot of people said, yeah, I'm sick of, you know, John McCain's fucking heroism being shoved down my throat. I'm sick of this sort of, you know, John McCain, the scion of a military family, 5th generation, flags of our fathers and that sort of thing. And this goes right back to the very fissure that's the founding of the American Republic, and that is that the War of Independence and the Revolution stirred up two dominant forces, and one was an ideological revolutionary movement, some of it connected to a slave-owning aristocracy, some of it connected to northern radicals, but all of whom were motivated, the leaders at least, by a battle of ideas, by the idea that they were living up to the English Revolution of 1688, reclaiming rights, and however economically convenient some of their claims were for them. But within that, there was always a group of people who saw the constitution of this new country, America, as ethnic in nature. These were people who were Americans, white Anglo-Scots by descent, and they were glued together not by any declaration of independence or fancy words or anything like that. They were glued together by having lived together and been together, and you know, some of them had fought on the side of the British because they didn't really like what was coming from that. And throughout, the American conservative Russell Kirk, who's the sort of intellectual godfather of the so-called paleo-conservatives, has always pointed out, in a way that often connects with certain left-wing arguments about this, that the Declaration of Independence, all these noble sentiments and that sort of thing, are a bit of a con. They're a bit of an ideological pitch, and that really the thread running through American life has always been an ethno-nationalism of collective identity. And when you had sort of movements, transitional movements like the Tea Party, which were a mixture of astroturfing, genuineness, you know, classical liberalism, small government, Ron Paul's sort of groups, you know, anarchists from New Hampshire, all this sort of stew put in together. They were a fervently sort of ideological movement. And some people joined onto them. When you went to sort of Tea Party gatherings, you'd find these people talking about, you know, what they wanted was universal health care. They didn't have the language. You know, what I really need is affordable health care and that sort of thing. And then if you said, well, what about Obamacare? No, I don't need Obamacare, I need affordable health care. It was this great, enormous disjuncture. And the Tea Party was a transitional sort of point where these people thought, a lot of these people thought that what they wanted was government off their backs and that sort of thing, and they didn't want that at all. Or the ones who were the next Trump generation who were in it, and that's where the Tea Party collapsed and split, and its ideological small government warriors just became once again what they always were, you know, small forces of intellectuals, whereas the Trump group rolled on. What Trump's people wanted, what Trump's supporters wanted as they came from the exurbs and the wilderness and that sort of thing, they were Keynesian nostalgists, if you like. They didn't want world of small government and striving and that sort of thing. They wanted post-war America back. They wanted the America of full employment, of good industrial jobs, and they wanted a cultural stability. They didn't want to take over the system. They wanted a stable system where the boss was the boss, and they were the workers, and everybody was getting a good deal because you were getting a good wage from being a car worker and that sort of thing. The boss may be getting rich, but he's not getting rich like Mark Zuckerberg or something like that. He's something worth 100 billion from what? From nothing, that sort of thing. They wanted that class settlement back, and that's what they talked about again and again and again. And that's the fantasy that Trump gave them, the industrial fantasy. That's why he kept talking about, he's not talking about we're going to transition it into new jobs and you can all, program apples and that sort of thing. He's saying we'll bring back the air conditioning plant, we'll bring back the car plant, and that sort of thing. And that was people's cultural class rise and their memories, not only of a time of relative wage prosperity, but a time when the working class was culturally central to American life. When, if you think of the rise of rock and roll, if you think of the rise of movies, if you think of people like figures like Elvis, like Marlon Brando, all those sorts of things, that is the time when even if the working class hadn't taken political power, it had taken cultural power, and it was at the centre of its own existence. And what had started to happen in America as the industrial jobs were offshored and globalisation took over, and these Rust Belt states were just destroyed beyond a way unlike anything that's happened in the UK or here. Just towns totally eviscerated and hollowed out many collective life. At the same time as that happened, a new class was arising, which was the class of knowledge workers, the intellectual workers, and college-educated people, and people whose ethical priorities were different, whose settings of gender relations were different, and sort of thing, and who now had a very strong ethical discourse. And a lot of the ethical discourse was saying about the industrial working class culture from the 40s up to the 80s, it's sexist, it's this, it's that sort of thing. So what's happening is a double whammy. Economically, socially, your life world is being eviscerated, and culturally, you are being scorned, and the things you valued and the things you felt at home in are being driven to the side, and that is a very bitter pill to swallow. And that was the drive. That was the other sort of class driver to Trump, and we can see that, in the thing that many progressive class people found very difficult to swallow, which was that 52% of African American people voted 90% against Trump, and African American women voted 98% against Trump. The only two black women who voted for Trump were this diamond and silk couple who kept appearing on Fox News to say how great Trump was. But white, non-college educated women, by white we simply mean people who don't really have a colour identity, have a non-class identity in that sense. They voted 52% for Trump, and they voted it, just like pussy grabbing and that sort of thing, and they voted it because they're simply saying that the cultural settings, the cultural political settings that the progressives and the knowledge class are saying you must abide by. You must say that the most important thing is that Trump is a sexual assaulter, an abuser, and that sort of thing, are not the most important things for us. They're just not. We don't see Trump as a Ronald Reagan type figure, as this quasi-deistic representative of our hopes and values, or or Obama for some people, that sort of thing. We see Trump as an agent of change. We vote for Trump like you hire a lawyer. You don't want a nice lawyer. When you look for a lawyer, you look for an arsehole who's going to be on your side. And that's who Trump is. Trump is the arsehole who's on their side. It's a client relationship. And it seems to me that one of the simplest explanations for the shift to in the midterms is not only is that you know, the actual existence of Trump, the actual happening of this thing. I was in the Hillary victory party on election